All right, everyone. Welcome to the fourth episode here of the Martech show. It is great to see you again, at least if I can imagine myself peering through your monitor here. Okay, that sounds kind of spooky now that I say it out loud. Welcome. Very excited for this episode. Got two amazing guests, Christopher Penn, the co-founder and chief data scientist of Trust Insights, and Subu Sampati with Caspera. Here, let me bring up this. So there we go. Christopher Penn, co-founder, chief data scientist of Trust Insights, and Subu Vempati, founder and CEO of Caspera. Welcome. So I was giving a shout out here just before we got started that next week will be the Martech conference, October 6th through 8th. And on the 8th, we will be holding the Stackies awards ceremony. And so this is for the 51 Stackies entries that we got this year. There's some really amazing ones. I've sort of, brushed them out here. So if you actually want to, see the winners, see the deck, you'll have to wait until then, but we hope you will join us. So Christopher, Subu, it's so great to have you. Today's topic is AI, as if that's come up at all in discussions around marketing and Martech in the past few years. It definitely feels like, Gartner's hype curve, AI is a very broad category. It would be one of those things of like, yeah, it's certainly ridden
like math.
ridden hype. But I've had a chance over the years, catch a number of, presentations and writing that Christopher has done on this. And I just found, Christopher, your perspective on like, okay, what's real here? What are people actually able to leverage these, technologies and techniques for today? And as a result, I find you to be the more credible source out there for like, okay, if we then start to extrapolate how that's going to change over the years ahead, a little bit less of the hype and a little bit more of like, no, this is kind of math.
Well, you're right. It is math. And that's the part that I think a lot of people forget is artificial intelligence, machine learning specifically, is nothing more than the application of mathematics at great scales using large amounts of data to solve problems. If you think about traditional software is we write the code and then the software spits out data, right? Everything from, Candy Crush to your word processor is exactly like that. We wrote the code, it spits out the data, and we make use of it. Machine learning is kind of the reverse, where we give the machines data and then they write their own code. But at the end of the day, it's still just a piece of software. And like any piece of software, you can use it well, you can use it poorly, you can misapply it. Think about the things in like your Office suite. You have a word processor, you have a spreadsheet package, you have a presentation package, right? And these all have important roles to play. How effective or efficient is it for you to use, say, PowerPoint to crunch numbers, right? It's really is not. It's a poor choice for it, right? That's not to discount what PowerPoint's good at. It's just that's not what it's good at. And the same thing is true in a lot of these different machine learning technologies. You have things like image recognition, video recognition, transcription. You don't need to be here yet. And all these ideas, all these concepts and techniques that you use, natural language processing, to just do some of what humans can do. Today, the machines are, we call narrow AI, and that means they have the ability to do tasks really, really well. So recognize, is this a picture of a hot dog or not, right? The Silicon Valley joke. Transcribe this. So if you are listening to this on audio or video, later on we could take this recording, stick it into automated transcription, and get something that resembles what we said. It will capture all of our foibles as well. There's no editing. And the most important, I think the technology most underused by a lot of marketers is natural language processing. There's so much that's happening in that space of machines being able to read and to generate new text. And you've seen reports the last couple of months about, for example, OpenAI's new GPT-3 model, which is text generation at massive scale. All of these techniques have been commercially viable for in many cases over a decade now. It's just a question of which techniques you use and how. Very similar to cooking, right? You have all these different appliances and all these different brands, but at the end of the day, you're still kind of doing the same thing. We are all trying to do the same thing. AI offers us the ability to do things faster, things better, and things a little bit cheaper. The difference is now it does it at scale better than us for a lot of these tasks. And for a lot of the tools, it's kind of a black box. And that's one of the big things that is problematic with AI today. We have been feeding machines data, and they've been creating their own software, and we have this very naive assumption as a citizenry, as a population, that if it comes out of the machine, it must be correct, when in fact we're training it based on what goes in the machine. And again, this is software. We've heard for what, 60 years with software, garbage in, garbage out. And that's what's happening with AI at much bigger scales. The biggest problem we have right now is around bias. It's around the types of bias that occur in the AI process. And the fact that an awful lot of vendors, Martech vendors especially, are not thinking about it. It's not on their radar. There's 6 kinds of bias that you can introduce in the process from beginning to end. Number 1 is people, right? You can hire people who are biased, who have a certain perspective on the world. And that can contaminate everything. It's actually probably one of the most dangerous parts of all, is if you have somebody who, say, doesn't believe that women should work as software engineers. Well, guess what? You've contaminated the entire rest of the pipeline. The second place that bias creeps in is in your strategy, which is, what are you trying to do with AI? Are you trying to do things that you don't think about could be problematic? Like, I'm going to try and measure the impact of social media on SEO. Cool. Why? And what are the things that could go wrong with that? The third place
could possibly go wrong with bias on social media. I can't imagine.
Exactly. And I think it's really important. Actually, we should take a quick diversion here. There's 2 kinds of bias. There's human bias, which is when we do something that others perceive as unfair, right? Particularly to a protected population. We do something that's unfair. And then there's statistical bias, which is when your data set varies from the population you're sampling from. The second type of bias, the statistical, is not necessarily good or bad, it just is. But when it turns into the first kind of bias, doing something unfair, then you have a problem.
Well, I would imagine, like, I mean, even if it's not turning into the first kind of bias, which, I mean, brings us to a whole bunch of, moral and ethical dilemmas, even if it's independent of that, I mean, like, if you're using this model to predict things like, the rights where a customer segment to, acquire folks, or what churn rates are, if the predictions you are getting out of the data you fed aren't actually, scaling to the population that you're trying to, engage with at all, then it's just that black box is making optimization choices that it thinks are right, but aren't may actually be doing more harm than good.
Exactly. I saw a survey the other day from this company that said, this is everything you need to know about, content marketing. And here's the companies we surveyed. Of this survey, 31% were for technology companies. 16% were this and this and this. And I looked at this and I said, okay, well, let's bring up the Bureau of Labor Statistics breakdown of sectors by employment. And education and healthcare are the 2 largest, and they weren't in the survey at all. I'm like, this survey is broken because there's a statistical bias. It is completely non-representative of the population. If you work in education or healthcare, which is like 30% of the economy, this is kind of a problem. So even just that strategy of how they did it was broken. So that's the second way. The third way is, of course, the data itself can be biased. The training data that goes in. So Amazon in 2018 got into a tremendous amount of trouble because they built a system to try and automate parts of the hiring process, and the system immediately stopped hiring women. Why? Because you fed training data for all male engineers. They should have known this was going to be a problem. The fourth area it creeps in is in the algorithm choice itself. If you choose the wrong algorithm, or the machine makes some bad choices, you may end up with some biases. The fifth is the model itself. Models can do what we call drift, which is where, as they get new training data, as they get new test data, they go away from their intended purpose. The classic example of this was Microsoft's Twitter chatbot in 2016. Which learned from the tweets people sent to it, and in 24 hours became a racist Nazi porn bot. because no one put any kind of guardrails on this thing, which was unfortunate. And then the sixth,
actually, one question on that,
yeah,
because like I'm trying to just make sure I understand like the distinctions between like model risk versus data risk. Like, what about that was the model versus just saying, oh well, there's this stream of data, and unfortunately, it's the data itself that we're feeding into it that's garbage in, garbage out, or
yep,
bad social content in, bad social content out.
it's a good question, and the difference there is that the model already existed and was being tuned and trained with new data as it came in, as opposed to you starting with the data and then starting with a model that was bad. Both are bad situations, and they're functionally equivalent. Either way, at the end of the day, you've got a piece of software that's broken, right? It'd be like opening up Microsoft Word and it just types swear words. No matter what you type on the keyword, it just types swear words. That's essentially what you have at the end of the day. But yeah, that was a case where the model existed and out of the box it started to work, and then as it got new data, it drifted. And there are ways to handle that. IBM famously is known for the Watson OpenScale product, where you have declared classes that are protected, and you say you may not vary in this data set off of these things, parameters. If you do, we're going to hit the stop button, and then you have to decide what to do. And then the last area where bias creeps in is in what we do with the results. Once we've got the results, what do we do with them? How do we interpret them? I saw a presentation at an AI conference not too long ago where a very famous insurance company was saying, hey, we know we're not allowed to discriminate on pricing in policies based on protected classes. So our workaround is we discriminate on where we market, so that we make sure we don't market to undesirables. I'm like, you just reinvented redlining. That's also still illegal. So
it feels like you've got two problems then here for like the marketer and even quite frankly a more technically savvy like marketing operations or Martech person, but I mean I think you've got an incredible advantage of your just skills and experience in data science and understanding the impact of how data feeds into these machine learning models. I feel like for marketers, there's a couple challenges. One is like, I think each of these cases you're talking about, like, they haven't been trained on like being able to identify where these sources of bias can come from and how do they monitor and how do they correct for it. But there's even another level that feels like it's challenging for marketers, which is so much of this is coming embedded into the Martech tools that they're purchasing commercially. I mean, there's a number of just ML models that seem to be embedded in, frankly, almost every Martech product at scale. But it's not always clear to the marketer, like, okay, where's machine learning actually being used here? And like, what is its strategy, data, algorithm, model? I mean, you talk to a number of marketers, with Trust Insights and coaching them through these sorts of things. Like, what would be your recommendations to people?
At the very least, you got to look at the outputs. If you go to the next slide, this is from the Martech show in Boston, Martech East, 2 years ago now. There was this vendor that said, we are going to predict your ideal customers. And you can see the red dots here are the ideal customers that are predicted, and the black dots are non-ideal customers. Now, if you know the layout of Boston, and this is for the coffee brand you see listed there, if you know the layout of Boston, you know that Washington Park, Upton Corner, Dudley Square, Lower Roxbury, these are predominantly black parts of the city, right? This software has redlined those parts of the city. It says there are no ideal customers for Dunkin' Donuts down in Dudley Square. Are you kidding me? Like, everybody drinks Dunkin' Donuts coffee, no matter what your race, no matter what your income level. Everybody likes watery, weak coffee in Boston.
Oh, poor Dunkin' Donuts.
But this is redlining, right? This is saying we're not going to market to predominantly black sections of the city. Whether or not the vendor intended to do this, this is the outcome. And so as the marketer, we look at this and go, and we can just say, hey, this does not pass the sniff test. This smells like BS to me, because I know for a fact that Dunkin' Donuts is something that pretty much most people will consume in the Metro Boston area, at greater or lesser lengths. So we don't know where the problem is with this vendor. We don't know whether it's their data, their model, their algorithm, maybe it's their people, but we do know there's a problem. And by looking at this in a post hoc visualization, we can see you've got some issues here. And you can say we don't trust this. Now, that brings us to explainability and interpretability. So what we're looking at here is called explainability. We look at the output and we go, this doesn't pass a sniff test, right? This is clearly not working correctly. Interpretability would then be, okay, now vendor, show me your code, show me the training data set, show me these things that you used to build this thing, because clearly it's got some issues, and maybe we can help you figure out, maybe you did something wrong on the training side, maybe you did something wrong on the algorithm choice side, whatever it is, you did something wrong. And for a lot of companies that are in the Martech space looking for vendors, that's a key part of the discussion, is to say, tell me your process for training. Tell me what parameters, tell me the algorithm choice. You don't have to give me every detail. I don't need this to know the secret sauce behind it, but I had better be able to look at this in the same way that, like, you know, a KPMG or an EY does an audit of your firm and says, okay, let's audit this and verify that this data set is not biased. And clearly we have a case where this is very much, there's a bias here.
Yeah, this is really scary because, I mean, well, certainly even just looking at this example, but in some ways this is, right, a scenario in which, like, oh, the visualization that you're getting out on the other side actually gives you a fighting chance to look at this and say, hey, this seems weird. Why are these areas, you know, red versus black? But there's so many of these things where, you know, like, you know, in targeting that's happening, you know, through ad tech or, you know, personalization technology, you know, on websites and things like this, where it feels like it would be harder for a human to get the visualization for the sanity check of, how do I know, like, yeah, what these predictions are being made don't have some of these, like, really fundamental problems to them.
It's really challenging, and it comes down to, first, knowing what questions to ask and knowing how to ask them of the vendor. I strongly recommend anybody who's doing any kind of work like this, read the book called Ethics in Data Science by Dr. Hilary Mason. It is 100% free on Amazon, will cost you nothing. Dr. Mason is one of the leaders in the field, and the book is not just a good book on the why, but it has piles of checklists. Like, hey, before you do this kind of project, ask these questions. You know, what could go wrong if this data, you know, how could this data be misused? How could this model be misused? And it's just asking those scenario planning questions that, frankly, if you're in Martech and you follow basic governance and you don't have that list of questions, you kind of screwed up. And so there are processes in place that should be in place at vendors and certainly at companies that are using these things to find and then decide, you know, how to handle biases. You look for statistical bias first, right? Which is, you identify the parity differences in data. And this can be whether it's the data you give to a vendor or the data you get out of a vendor, or both. You determine if there are any disallowed biases. One of the things that you have to treat is that you have to look at data and AI as the reverse of human law. Human law says generally you're innocent until proven guilty. In AI, we have to go the opposite. We have to say you are guilty of bias until you prove that you are not, that the machine is not biased. So a really simple example. If you are marketing purses to an upper income level, there's a strong correlation between income and race, right? So if you just naively do income filtering, you're going to discriminate on race. That's just the reality. So you have to be able to demonstrate in your selection algorithm, given two people of different races but of equal income levels, do they have the same probability of seeing the ad for your purse? If the answer is yes, then you are discriminating on income, which is allowable, and not on race, which is disallowable. So you do that. Then the third part is looking for correlates. Like we just talked about, income is highly correlated to race. So you've got to be able to untangle that and prove that you have not created variables, you know, aggregate variables in your data that function as a disallowed class. So you cannot, for example, if you were to pull in people's Facebook, you know, likes and the movies they like and the stuff they've watched on Netflix and the music they listen to, you can predict with like 99% accuracy their gender, their sexual orientation, probably their income level. And if you combine all those variables together, then guess what? You're discriminating on disallowed classes. Determine your impact and then decide whether or not you're going to allow it. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to inspecting the outcomes and saying, is this causing harm, right? It's kind of like medicine. First, do no harm. With AI, same is true. First, don't make the world a worse place. We've got enough challenges as it is without adding more to it.
Wow. All right. I'm going to want to come back to this here. I think there's a lot more we can dig into this. I wanted to bring Subu here into our conversation as well too. Thank you, Subu, for sponsoring this episode. And you want to tell folks a little bit about Caspera?
Absolutely. So, but first, thank you very much for having me over. This is wonderful. This one, I'm captivated by how Christopher is explaining some of the stuff. So I've been a business manager all my life, so I'm learning a lot of AI. But nevertheless, listening from somebody who's an expert, this will make a difference. And I happen to be a fan of yours, Scott. You will see your influence actually on Caspera a lot. So hopefully one of the days I will share with you. I don't think a week passes without me quoting you. So somewhere or another place, it's like amazing stuff. But let me tell, so my journey. So very quickly, I've been a business manager. I found software buying is one of the most challenging things, so it's not easy. It's one of the most difficult decisions I would make. And it will make or break my career, especially more so nowadays with short-term life cycles. So average tenure of a business manager is 18 months or 24 months. And if I don't produce the results, I'm in trouble. And if my software, whatever I'm buying, will determine that. And so it has become essentially career making sometimes. Not all the software purchases, but for sure, it can create a problem. There is a time pressure. At the same time, I don't have a trusted advisor. So IT teams are very busy. If they have to support every single manager trying to buy software, then they will go back. There's no way they can do it. Their budgets are sinking, and so it's a challenge for them. And so what AI is used as a jargon, right? So if I were to pick one example, AI happens to be a jargon, right? Everybody says I'm AI, I'm AI. We also say we are AI. Right? What does it mean? I have no idea as a business manager, and so it's very difficult to navigate the stuff. And Scott, you have not made life simple when you started getting people to recognize the choices available. The sheer number of choices available. How do I pick from 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 solutions? How do I narrow it down to what I need to buy? The sheer availability buying has become very difficult. I want to assist them.
Yeah.
That is my mission. That's what we have set out to do in Caspera. At
Cool.
the same time, the software vendors are brilliant and they have USP. I've met a lot of them, and their USP is getting hidden under categories. They are finding it difficult to reach business managers. These are the two that we are trying to match. That's what the Caspera mission is.
Yeah, well, I mean, better matching, for buyers and sellers seems like an ideal.
We are making absolutely. We are making a beginning. I believe that we can do that for a period of time, getting better at it for sure.
Cool. Well, listen, thank you for sponsoring this episode. Do you want to tell folks a little bit about the nonprofit that you decided to donate to on behalf of the show?
Oh, this is, so we are captivated. I will tell you where we caught the attention. COVID changed our traffic trajectory. So in Caspera, so before we were getting about 10,000 monthly active users, and post-COVID, now, so within 4 months, we jumped to 50,000, 60,000 kind of a monthly active users. People are working from home. So COVID has become something very, very real life thing for us. Then it turns out that I'm in India right now, and there is this migration of the labor, so that happened because of COVID, and they were moving from one state to another, and they were getting stuck all the places and not having the ability to always have access to food and other things. They just needed to get back to their native places. And so it has become a very conscious thing. And one of the things that we looked at when we said, hey, ensuring that food is available for the needy in the COVID, and COVID is impacting the low income group the most. They are out of jobs and in some way. And so this is a natural thing for us to think of this answer.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing that. So for the two of you here, I want to share this chart. Actually, there's a couple charts here from a study that R.R. Donnelly did in 2019 and with the same marketers in 2020. They called it the pivot report. And one of their questions they'd asked was, all right, are you concerned that this emphasis on AI or ML is going to limit your personal growth as a marketer? And you can sort of see from 2019 to 2020, and I believe that was in like May of 2020. So, COVID was up and running and people were, wrestling perhaps with more you know, high-speed digital transformation in very uncomfortable circumstances. But, you know, we're clearly having to lean a lot more into rethinking this. The shift in people's perception of like, yeah, actually, I am concerned about that. And there was a second chart that they had where they actually broke this down for the 2020 results based on age group, you know, and marketers between 25 and 40. This was somewhat surprising to me, you know, reported being much more concerned about AI and ML than older marketers, 41 and up. I found myself wondering, is this because you know, I mean, the older marketers, you know, they've seen more experience of the entire realm of, you know, what is marketing and are less concerned that somehow that's all going to be taken over by machines? Or is this that, yeah, I mean, the folks who are actually, yeah, this next generation of marketers that are coming up, they're just a lot closer to what they're seeing, and they really do think, for better and worse, yeah, this can really change what their possibilities are. So what is your guys' reactions to this?
You know, I used to work at a PR firm, and there were folks, junior folks in that 25 to 40 bracket. This one person's job was to search for media mentions of a client and put them in a tracker. This person's job 8 hours a day was to search Google and copy and paste links into a spreadsheet. That is not a career. That is drudgery, right? I would claw my own eyeballs out after, you know, doing that for a week. And like, this is also a task that can be completely automated, and it really should be. The Brookings Institute has a great quote: AI will take tasks, not jobs, right? Now, if your job is a collection of one task, your job is at risk. Your personal growth is a substantial risk. But as those repetitive tasks get more and more consumed by machines, it makes all of us think, what is the value that I add on top of repetition, right? Because, you know, manufacturing dealt with this a century ago when, you know, industries and factories and stuff came around. Are there no factories that employ people anymore? Of course not, right? But now that job looks very different, where the factory supervisor, in some cases, may be a person who's supervising robotics, right? They are an engineer who supervises the robots. The best analogy is, you know, the position of first violin may get outsourced to a machine, but every orchestra still needs a conductor. The challenge is there's only one conductor per orchestra. So I think the concerns are somewhat valid in that, yes, if you can consolidate tasks and reduce them, you have fewer people, but those people can use more of their capabilities. But that also then puts the onus of personal self-development on the individual to say, you've got to be the best at what you do in your, you know, patch of the world, because as the machines progress, there will be less and less room for the mediocre.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I guess I'm somewhat of an optimist by nature, you know, and so one way I look at it is, you know, I don't know many marketers who have a lot of free time. It feels like, you know, I mean, again, if you're that single task, you know, person, that's particularly challenging. But I think, you know, most marketers, you know, are actually juggling a variety of tasks. But there's always that list of things they know they should be doing, right? I mean, first and foremost always seems to me to be like, spend more time talking to customers. We all know how incredibly valuable that is. It definitely takes advantage of, you know, a certain set of skills that are, you know, inherently human, just even in creating that empathy and sort of understanding, you know, those conversations. But yeah, there's more to be done than, you know, we ever do. And so my optimistic take on this would be like, oh, well, if we could get some of this, you know, repetitive task work, you know, off of our plates, would that actually free up more time for us to, you know, do these higher value types of engagements? Or or would we still not actually do, you know, more customer engagements? We just have fewer marketers.
I think of it, you know, these are valid things, whatever I heard, you know, so I really liked the way Christopher characterized about task potentially getting impacted. I can relate to that. But one of the things what I've seen is this, right? There are two aspects to it. The way I see it is that where is AI augmenting what you are doing and where it is trying to replace you. So for instance, what we do is actually augmenting what the business manager is trying to do. So he's trying to select a software, we augment his ability to be able to find that. The second aspect of the way I see it is that is AI is for growth. Is it growth oriented? Is it, for instance, helping you discover new growth opportunities and things like that? In which case, so growth will propel jobs rather than, reduce the number of jobs. It's about pure efficiency. Of course, there is a chance that jobs will be lost. So these two things will happen simultaneously. The dynamic, it is no different in that sense. AI is no different from a software product that previously was automating a lot of stuff that is already there.
Subu says it really well there. There's a tool called Ava that helps generate music, right? It just, you give it the parameters, like I want a pop song of this length and this key, and it generates music. And what it also does is dumps out a MIDI file, and then you can take that to a professional musician and say, hey, I had the machine generate 40 candidates. Of those 40 candidates, this one sounded okay to me, but it's still pretty mediocre, right? And then that professional musician can say, well, let's tune this, tweak this, add this instrumentation and things like that. And they can add their creative on top of the framework that the AI has laid down. And you can get some pretty decent stuff that way. There's a whole consortium of people who are creating music this way, like he said, augmented, where you're augmenting on top of the existing capability as opposed to starting from scratch.
Yep.
That's where there's opportunity. And the other thing that Subu said that was absolutely right is that when you look at growth, for every task that AI takes away, that creates the opportunity for new stuff that does not previously exist, new entire jobs and careers that do not exist. Something as simple as, for example, semantic modeling has been a largely academic discipline for 40 years, right? But now that we have good natural language processing capabilities, the ability for someone who has a computational linguistics background to work in industry and say, hey, I can take your SEO program from 0 to hero using computational linguistics and natural language processing because I understand what the end result of like Google's neural networks is going to be, and I can get you there slightly faster. So suddenly now this person who may have, just done papers and, and taught classes at, part-time in university now is going to be paid, mid 6 figures by a tech company to say, yeah, let's really create that next great SEO tool. So there was always, it was a Schumpeter's creative destruction. Every time something goes away, new things come up.
So I'd like to nudge the folks in our live audience here. If you have questions you want to ask Christopher and Subu, do plug them into that Q&A window and we will pull them up. And if you're so inclined, we're happy to bring you up on video as well too. So while you're thinking of your questions, I wanted to ask you, Christopher, when you and I were chatting before in preparing for this episode, one of the things that we talked a bit about was that, okay, so many Martech, tools, part of their sales pitch is, yeah, we're using AI. And again, for marketers who are like, listen, I know AI is now becoming, a real thing. It's a part of, a lot of new capabilities, but yeah, like how to evaluate, those claims and get a sense of like how much there is there when someone talks about that. You had some just really interesting thoughts on, yeah, how should a marketer like sort of peel back a bit that discussion, with a MarTech vendor for, what their AI actually is.
Some of it comes to knowing the language, knowing the lingo, knowing what some of the different things mean. And that's important. And just to be able to understand, like, okay, when I see this, this is generally what this means and what these techniques in that discipline are. It's kind of like cooking. If I say broiling, you don't necessarily need to know the inner workings of a stove, right? If I say heating, Cassie Kozyrkov from Google says, does anybody know how to build a microwave oven from scratch? Construct a magnetron. We're like, no. She's like, how many of you use microwaves? Like everybody raised their hands. Like that's the difference. You don't necessarily need to be able to build a microwave from scratch, but you better know what it can do and what it shouldn't do and why you should never put a big chunk of metal in it. And the same is true of AI, being able to know the broad categories. Can you go back a few slides to the Caspera slide?
Yep.
So when you look at this slide here, what you see is a general pipeline, right? You have data ingestion on the left-hand side. So they're bringing in all sorts of text data. They're doing some topic modeling, and then they've got essentially an output model that's going to say, this is how we're going to do it. So the questions I would ask someone like Subu is, okay, in the topic model, what technique or method are you using there? This is an actual question. What technique are you using there? If you're
So you didn't realize you were going to be on the hook there. You're like, I'm the business guy. I'm the business guy.
Okay, so in case of topic modeling, we are essentially it is a supervised model completely. So we are supervised learning. So there is quite a bit of effort that is happening in that, because of the fact that in case of B2B, it's very, very domain specific knowledge that what we are finding. It is changing by marketing to so industry to industry, so region to region. Sometimes the terminology is different, and so everything seems to me that in case of B2B, we found that the language issues have come into a big way. So because of that, so in scope, so far as topic modeling is concerned, I know that my team uses supervised learning quite a lot. We have panel of experts who are helping us with it.
Do you know, are they doing something like TF-IDF? Are they doing something like vectorization with fast text? Are they using transformers like BERT? Do you know what they use in that box? And it's okay if you don't.
I don't think so. I don't think I know that, but I can get you the answer.
Yeah. So,
so my co-founder is, so AI Guru. He has 35 patents to his credit. So when I talk to him, I get lost.
Awesome.
I will get your answer.
But so this is an example, Scott, of exactly this. And it's Subu, I apologize for putting you on the spot like that.
No, not a problem.
Looking at that pipeline and going, okay, what's in that box? Like, I don't need to know the inner workings of how he does his topic modeling, but I do need to ask, like, what kind of technology is in there? And when you're vetting vendors, one of the easiest ways to detect whether a vendor is telling the truth or not is exactly what Subu just did. Right? It's say like, oh yeah, let me talk to my engineer, or hey, do you want to talk to my engineer and and talk shop with them? Beware of any vendor that says no, you cannot talk to our technical people. Right? That is a red flag number one. It says, okay, they've got something to hide. If they'll let you talk to the engineers, especially if they'll let you talk to an engineer without a salesperson present,
good luck.
They've got the goods, because engineers will say the darndest things. Like the sales guy will be like, oh yeah, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. And he talks to the engineer, like, no, we don't do that. Who told you that? Right? But that's how you get the honest answers. You talk to the engineering folks and okay, you're doing topic modeling. Are you doing vectorization, which is the standard approach right now? Like, oh yes, you are. Okay, great. So you at least know those words mean and stuff. I've talked to a couple of vendors who have attempted to bluff their way through the conversation, and it did not go well for them. So knowing enough of the lingo, knowing and being able to talk to the technical people are easy ways to vet the truthfulness of those vendors and say, like, this guy's giving me the runaround here.
Yeah, but I mean, all right. So you're all, I mean, part of, the questions you were asking Subu, like, is it just you, Subu? They were like over my head. I'm like, okay, well, if he is doing vectors, is that a good thing? And so like, I mean, for a marketer who doesn't have that sort of, training, it's like, okay, well, I can ask these questions, but will I even understand the answers if they're giving them to me? How would you suggest a more layperson like myself try and like is it asking someone to be able to explain it to me in a way that like, okay, well, when you say vectorization, you explain it to me how that's going to impact.
Right. And go ahead, Subu.
No, so go ahead. So I'm fascinated hearing to your examples. They're live for me, so go ahead.
Vectorization is when you turn words into numbers, right? And then you look at the mathematical relationships between those numbers. So if I said the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dogs, right? So would return to the number one in that sequence, and it would appear again. And what you're looking for are how frequently do these numbers appear next to each other as a way to generate their closeness, right? So when you do topic modeling, you're going to be looking for terms that are clustered, especially like, so with something like what Subu is doing, you're looking at reviews, you're ingesting all these reviews of software, like, G2 Crowd and Capterra or whatever. And if a substantially negative valence word like, this sucks, shows up, like, okay, this product clearly has some issues. But the reason why vectorization is important is that it allows you to digest enormous amounts of text very, very quickly without having to necessarily understand the context of it. You can just see those inner mathematical relationships. It's kind of like, in a lot of ways, it's similar conceptually to the way PageRank used to work back in the old days. Google's PageRank, where the number of things that linked to one thing indicated the importance of that thing. But when you look at the way the words appear once they're transformed to numbers and how they are self-referential, you can get a sense very quickly, oh, this concept is important. And the reason why vectorization is important is that you can get what are called semantic clusters. So if I say coffee, and my website is all about coffee, but I have a model that also understands that espresso is a form of coffee, even if I don't say espresso on my site, someone in a review might say that and indicate, this is still about coffee.
Yep.
Wow.
So to deal with your question, Scott, though, I mean, there is a cottage industry, several cottage industries in this field of, can you coach and guide somebody through vendor selection, right? Can you talk to a salesperson, at the later stage of evaluation? Like Subu's software is phenomenal for narrowing down that 8,000, company Lumascape to like 10 choices. And then you have somebody to kind of coach you through, okay, of those 10 choices, do you want someone help, talking to the salesperson for 5 of them? There's that. And then on the flip side, as we were talking about earlier, there's going to be an entire industry of people whose responsibility will be to vet and audit models, software, data sets behind the scenes and say, yes, this company is doing the right thing.
No, I will just add one a little bit of a couple of lines here. Here's a question that is very valid. We have 16,000 marketing and sales solutions. 4,700 of them claim that they are AI software, right? So, but we badge only around 2,300 of them through AI. I will tell you why. The way we use it, of course, I am not getting into the detail that Chris is talking about, but Chris talked about another part in a minute ago. He talked about the microwave example. So what we see is that what do the business managers, other users of the software, have they experienced the benefit of AI? And that's only when I acknowledge that they are AI. So it's essentially, so there is one is, getting into the detail about saying that do they have the vectorization? Do they have any of those things? Another part, what Chris talked about is the fact that is the benefit of the AI clear. And, when people talk about that, and then we are able to capture that, and then we can badge them. So less than 50% of the companies that claim to be AI, we are badging as AI.
That's exactly the Financial Times. The Financial Times in 2018 did a survey of 100 companies that said they do AI, and 35% were lying. 35% had not a stitch of it under the hood. Like, okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, so I think we have successfully intimidated our studio. I'm not asking any questions.
But you do put people at ease. Go ahead.
I do feel like, I was so excited to have you on, Christopher, just because I even from our, conversation prepping for this, it just, the depth of what's happening here. And so like the way, these surveys of people who are concerned about, AI and ML, impacting their professional growth and marketing. It does kind of feel like, okay, well, the number of things to be done in marketing to adapt to and really be able to lead and manage with these new capabilities, just everything from like, vendor management, but even more so once you've got these tools, like the programs around bias, whether again, it's like business impact bias or, more moral, ethical, challenges with that bias. That's like a whole new set of capabilities that I suspect for most marketing operations and most marketing tech teams today, they just don't have that capability developed. There's a tremendous opportunity there, but if you're a marketer to whom, vectorization kind of like flew over your head, you might be like, wow, I think I have a lot to learn to be able to really, manage this new set of capabilities. When you say
the other thing I would say is this: if you're concerned about your personal growth, right? We know narrow AI will broadened in scope over time, but is still very constrained to being able to do individual tasks very, very well, right? Which means that you should look at your own background and say, am I good at only one thing, or can I diversify? When you look at the top 10 skills that LinkedIn says are important in 2020, they're all over the board, right? If you're good at just analytical reasoning, right? A lot of that can, tasks that are going to get pulled away to AI. But if you're good at analytical reasoning and talking to salespeople and visual presentation skills, guess what? You are now crossing domains, and that is extremely difficult for machines to do. They're so far not been able to do it at all. So as any marketing professional, if you can double down on your secondary strengths and bring them up so that you are a multidisciplinary marketer, you have a much greater chance of having good career growth. And it's much more difficult to replace, substantial portions of your job, because you can do a lot of things really well and take ideas that work in one discipline and move them to another discipline. And that's your insurance policy for AI for at least the next decade.
Wow. All right. Well, I will, run for the exit now with that optimistic view. I think that's some very good advice. Christopher, Subu, thank you so much for joining me here. So we are going to have our next episode in a couple of weeks, October 16th, 11 a.m. ET will be the live version of it. 5 Martech trends for the decade ahead from the agency view. And I'm going to have Jason Baldwin, who's the head of product management at WPP. I am sure some of these elements of AI and ML that, you pulled back the cover a bit for us, Christopher, will definitely come up there. So thank you again. Great to have you guys. Have a wonderful.
Yeah, it's a pleasure connecting with you, Christopher. Scott, of course, and I've come to know a little bit at least, but glad that this forum has given me the chance.
Thanks for having us.